Nobody knew the reason behind Benji's repeated return to the shelter following adoption. By this point, it had happened 11 times, and all of his owners had done was keep making flimsy justifications. They didn't learn the whole nature of Benji's problem until the new trainee opted to take him home with her. We will find out his entire story together, but first make sure to subscribe and to follow our channel for more. Driving back to the shelter, Stacy was still reeling from the incident. Benji was dozing out in the backseat. This unfortunate dog had to be returned to the shelter for the 12th time, and Stacy felt terrible since she had been so convinced she could help. But at least they now knew the reason. 3 other workers were ready for Stacy and Benji when they arrived since she had called ahead. They were understandably unhappy that the adoption had failed, but they were also incredibly inquisitive about the cause because they would finally get a frank explanation now. 11 times they knew Stacy would tell them the truth, even though Benji had always been sent back to the shelter with an explanation. However, they would come to realize that they weren't prepared for the truth. Benji had already spent 1.5 years at the shelter at this point. Even though he was no longer a puppy, he nevertheless had a very puppy-like appearance, and anybody who went to the shelter to pick him fell in love with him. In reality, Benji didn't spend all that much time in shelter throughout those 1.5 years. But the point is, the individuals who adopted him just kept giving him back. When he was first brought into the shelter as a 3-week-old puppy, this had already begun. A dog that belonged to his first owners gave birth to 5 healthy puppies. However, for some reason, they chose to keep 4 of them, while only Benji was voluntarily given to the shelter. At the time, there were some questions at the shelter, so they had Benji thoroughly examined by their on-call vet. The shelter simply came to the conclusion that the puppy was probably just unlucky to have ended up here when all the test results appeared to suggest that there was nothing wrong with him. The very next day after placing him up for adoption, someone entered to take him home. People who saw Benji understood this was a great opportunity because it wasn't often that a shelter would have pups offered for adoption because most dogs that were brought in were older. The family he would be joining appeared to be the ideal one, a young married couple desperate to get a dog for their 5-year-old daughter. Benji's new owners brought him back to the shelter in just 3 weeks. Each time Benij was adopted, he was finally returned to the shelter and was adopted once more within a 2-week period. The shelter had never experienced anything like this, so they were baffled as to why it was happening. The justifications offered for returning the poor pet were consistently weak and superficial. They were also so dissimilar from one another that at least some of them had to be lies. Benji was accused as having excessive energy by some, while he was allegedly incapable of getting out of bed by others. While some claimed he was hostile against other dogs, others claimed he was too afraid of them to visit the park. Simply put, it didn't make sense. The animal shelter didn't know what else to do but to put Benji up for adoption once more. They were unable to simply keep him at the shelter indefinitely. Nobody had any hope left for this sad puppy to find a forever home after he was returned for the 11th time. Everyone at the shelter simply felt that they needed to resolve this issue. They were all extremely concerned about this dog, and fortunately for them, a trainee named Stacy, who had only been working with them for approximately 2 weeks, had the answer. She was learning in order to train as a veterinarian. For 2 months, she volunteered at the shelter. She saw Benji for the first time when his most recent owner brought him back, and she fell in love with him at first sight. However, she was aware that much effort was ahead in order to rebuild this poor dog's faith in humans and restore his former sense of joy and happiness. Stacy was confident that she could succeed, but this optimism would soon wear off. Since Benji wasn't the family's first dog, fortunately they already had a lot of the other dog supplies at home. So his owners noted right away that he didn't appear to trust or get along with the other dogs very well. And despite the fact that the family gave Benji excellent care, it seemed as though Benji did not want to be there. With time, Benji began to socialize with the other dogs after appearing to have his icy demeanor slightly cooled by all the attention and contact. They took Benji to the park, went shopping for a new toy, and even made him a beautiful steak. A day in canine paradise had a significant impact on Benji. He had a tail that was wagging all day. In line with the rest of the family, Stacy appeared to appreciate her time spent with Benji. One morning as the family awoke, Benji was immediately out of bed. They looked everywhere in the home, but they couldn't find him. Stacy became anxious. She betrayed the shelter's confidence by handling Benji carelessly. What was happening? Benji either fled or something else occurred. She made the decision to keep it a secret from them and instead took a week off to look for Benji. She began by inquiring of every one of her neighbors, but she was unsuccessful. Benji was nowhere to be found. It appeared as though he had vanished into thin air. This caused Stacy a great deal of pain, but eventually the phone rang. Benji had been located. The caller sounded upset, but he didn't appear to want to say where or how yet. Stacy was immediately on the edge of her seat as her veins raced with adrenaline. What was happening to Benji? Stacy approached the man's home in a state of extreme confusion and worry. The distance was almost an hour's drive. How on earth did Benji travel this far from home? Finally, Stacy came to find the man who found him waiting for him at the front door. He was standing there with his arms crossed and had a really disturbed appearance. How in the world had Benji behaved? Stacy was a little frightened because the man didn't appear to move a muscle. Benji apparently arrived earlier that day. The man searched the area for Benji's owner because he had not seen any of the posters. However, when he was unable to locate anyone, he decided to call the animal shelter because Benji still had their phone number on his collar. After that, Sheed and Benji returned to the shelter. When Stacy arrived, she discovered that the other staff members had already contacted several of Benji's prior owners to inquire about their experiences with the dog because he had a severe problem and a strange behavior around cats. These calls' outcomes were startling. Every single former owner they contacted provided them with the same account. Benji assaulted another animal at some time, which is the real reason they had to send him back. They now had a clear image of Benji, which clarified a lot of things. What led to this behavior toward animals in general? Because they were concerned that Benji might be killed if they told the truth, they had lied about it. They all adored that dog far too much to feel guilty about it, but they all returned him back to the shelter to make sure it didn't happen again while in their charge. Benji was going to spend a few weeks at the shelter where they would focus on helping him develop a greater level of cat trust. Benji's cat-related anger was eventually trained out of him through a challenging procedure, and he was returned to Stacy and her family's custody. They were overjoyed to have Benji back because he was the puppy they had always desired. They never again experienced any issues with their new dog after that. He joined the family, becoming the addition Stacy had always known he could be. Benji had at last discovered the place he belonged. Benji had everything a dog could possibly need at that moment, so he was done with shelters.